Joining us now is Congressman James Walkinshaw, who serves on the Homeland Security and Oversight Committees and will be having one of the busiest weeks in Washington, D.C. Congressman, thank you for making time for us ahead of your week. Your colleagues, Robert Garcia, who we just mentioned, and Thomas Massie, are calling for Howard Lutnik to resign. Do you share that sentiment?
I think that's absolutely appropriate. I mean, look, it's quite clear from the files that he had not just a relationship, but an extensive relationship that was deep and broad with Epstein, which is completely at odds with the statements he has made. He lied to the American people. He lied, presumably, to his boss, President Trump, and he should resign or be fired. No question about it.
What are you expecting from Ghislaine Maxwell, and how are lawmakers strategizing right now ahead of this deposition?
Well, unfortunately, we expect Ghislaine Maxwell to plead the Fifth to avoid incriminating herself further. I think there are some very serious questions that she should be answering, questions that haven't been answered by the files that have been released thus far. You know, who were the additional co-conspirators? Who, if anyone else, was involved in the crimes, engaged in the crimes? I'd like to ask her under oath about her conversation with Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, which led to her being moved to a minimum security prison, to a much cushier prison. I'd like to ask all those questions. Our understanding, our expectation is she's not going to answer questions tomorrow. She's going to plead the Fifth.
Speaking of Maxwell's conversation with Todd Blanche, who used to be an attorney for Trump, we need to keep reiterating,
yes,
when she was asked about Trump. Take a listen to what she said.
Trump was always very cordial and very kind to me, and I just want to say that I admire his extraordinary achievement in becoming the president now, and I like him, and I've always liked him. I actually never saw the president in any type of massage setting. I never witnessed the president in any inappropriate setting in any way. The president was never inappropriate with anybody. In the times that I was with him, he was a gentleman in all respects.
So, Congressman, what do you make of those comments? It sounds to me like someone might be angling for a pardon. What's your take?
Yeah, look, first, I don't think there's anybody who knows Donald Trump who would say with a straight face that he's a gentleman in all respects. I mean, that's just ridiculous. Look, I think Ghislaine Maxwell, like so many others, has watched how you play the presidential pardon game with Donald Trump. You know, you kowtow to him, you praise him, you cover for him in any way you need to. She hasn't gotten a pardon, but she has gotten transferred to a much, much more comfortable prison situation. So she's clearly playing that game. I'd like her to answer those questions under oath about President Trump, and not just President Trump, others as well.
One of the other lines of questioning that your colleagues, but also many Americans, are gravely concerned about are potential ties Epstein may have had to foreign governments. What are lawmakers like yourself doing now to probe those questions?
Well, I think that's one of the reasons we need to get the missing 3 million files to determine whether there's anything in those files that could provide additional information in that respect. That's also on the list of questions that we'd like to ask Ms. Maxwell tomorrow. If that was taking place, I think it's reasonable to suspect she would have known about it, but it's really the reason we got to get the full 6 million files. Todd Blanche said there are 6 million files. They've only released 3 million. We're missing half the files.
I know there are a lot of questions around Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, but it's also important not to lose sight of the survivors. The organization World Without Exploitation released a new and powerful commercial today. It's going to be airing on the Super Bowl if it hasn't already. It features the survivors of what has happened. And I know a lot of the questions that we're pursuing, and certainly Congress is pursuing, is about the perpetrators. How do you take that from an informational point of view of finding out who these people are to actual accountability that is centered around justice for the survivors? How does that look like going forward?
Well, look, what the survivors have courageously been fighting for, first and foremost, is transparency. And I think transparency will lead to accountability. For some individuals like Howard Lutnik, who lied about their relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, even after it was clear what Jeffrey Epstein has done, accountability could mean resigning or losing your position in Donald Trump's cabinet. In other cases, there are states that don't have statutes of limitation for some of the crimes that we know Epstein and perhaps others were involved in, and potentially some of the files could lead to additional prosecutions. One of the things that we as oversight Democrats are very focused on is following the money and subpoenaing the bank records and financial records from Epstein and his banks. I think that could get us a lot of additional information that's missing from the files.
Congressman, what do you make of the fact that there have been some resignations of politicians over their connection to Jeffrey Epstein, but not here in the United States? It's happened in the UK, it's happened in Slovakia. I believe there are investigations happening in Poland, in Norway, in various other countries, and yet somehow our federal law enforcement here in the United States has shown relatively little interest in moving the ball forward. What do you make of that?
I think it's unacceptable. And look, that's a pattern throughout this for decades, by the way. You can go back to Alex Acosta, who was the prosecutor in Florida who gave Epstein the sweetheart deal that allowed him to continue committing these heinous crimes. He went on to become Donald Trump's labor secretary, had to resign when it was revealed how egregious the sweetheart deal was, but he failed upward and made his way into the cabinet. We have Howard Lutnik, who's lied about the relationship, made his way into Trump's cabinet. I mean, look, one of Trump's political strengths, I guess you could call it, is that he's absolutely shameless, and people who have no shame aren't going to resign or go down easy when these kind of things are revealed. And we just have to keep the pressure on to ultimately get the justice that the survivors are courageously demanding that they deserve.
Congressman James Walkinshaw, thanks so much for your time tonight.
Thank you.